December 16th, 1944. The forests of the Ardennes lay buried under snow, silent and still, until the sky itself began to kill. German soldiers advancing confidently through the fog suddenly froze as artillery shells burst, not on the ground, not against the trees, but in midair, directly above their heads. Metal fragments rained down like a storm of invisible daggers. Foxholes, trenches, even the thick trunks of the forest. None of it offered protection. Veterans who had survived the Russian front now faced something that defied logic. How could artillery know exactly where to explode? Unbeknownst to them, a single decision, an unauthorized gamble by one American officer, had just unleashed the Allies' most closely guarded secret. A technology so advanced it seemed almost alive, able to sense its surroundings and decide the perfect moment to detonate. In that instant, the Germans realized the rules of survival on the battlefield had changed forever. This was no ordinary weapon. This was the proximity fuse, and it was about to rewrite the mathematics of war. If you're fascinated by hidden wartime secrets and the technology that changed history, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share this with a friend who loves history. It helps us bring you even more stories like this one. In the bitter winter of 1944, Hitler prepared a move so audacious that even his own generals doubted its feasibility. The Allies were pressing from all directions, yet the dictator still believed in a final reversal of fortune. The plan, codenamed Operation Watch on the Rhine, envisioned a massive German offensive through the snow-choked forests of the Ardennes. Its objective was bold: split the Allied armies, seize Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace on Germany's terms. Secrecy was paramount. Entire divisions were shifted under cover of darkness, their movements masked by relentless fog. Fuel depots were stockpiled in hidden glades. Commanders were told almost nothing until the last moment, ensuring surprise but breeding confusion. For German soldiers, especially veterans of the Eastern Front, the Ardennes promised something different: a chance to strike the Americans, whom they considered inexperienced compared to the Soviets. Spirits lifted. Orders promised decisive breakthroughs that would crush enemy morale in days. At dawn on December 16, 1944, the silence of the forest shattered. Over 1,600 German artillery pieces roared simultaneously across an 85-mile front. The ground shook violently as shells rained down on American positions, caught utterly unprepared. The opening bombardment was terrifyingly effective. Many frontline American units consisted of exhausted veterans sent to rest in quiet sectors, or green replacements unfamiliar with combat. Trenches collapsed, communication lines snapped, and panic spread rapidly through shattered battalions. Through the smoke and snow, German armored columns rumbled forward. Tiger tanks, panzer divisions, and mechanized infantry surged with precision. Soldiers marched with grim determination, convinced that this sudden, violent strike would reclaim initiative stolen since Normandy. The offensive's scale was staggering. 200,000 German troops, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces committed to this gamble. It was the largest German offensive on the Western Front since 1940, designed to shock the world. American commanders struggled to comprehend what was unfolding. Intelligence services had catastrophically failed, dismissing hints of German buildup as impossible. They believed Germany lacked resources for a major attack, leaving defenses dangerously thin where the blow now fell. For a fleeting moment, it worked. German forces surged across Belgian villages and Luxembourg hills, overrunning isolated outposts and capturing thousands of prisoners. Roads jammed with American equipment abandoned in haste, symbols of shocking tactical surprise. Yet beneath this appearance of momentum lay fragility. German fuel reserves were razor-thin, dependent on capturing Allied stockpiles to continue the advance. Every extra mile gained stretched supply lines further, a ticking clock against their progress. On the ground, American units fought desperately to slow the tide. Small reconnaissance squadrons, isolated cavalry groups, and scattered artillery positions resisted far beyond their numbers, buying precious hours for reinforcements to mobilize. One such unit was the 38th Cavalry Squadron, holding thin lines near Monschau. Against overwhelming German formations, they clung to their positions. Their survival would depend not only on grit, but on a weapon the enemy did not expect. That weapon was about to appear almost by accident. At this critical moment, a single colonel, Oscar Alfred Axelson, faced a choice that defied orders but would change the course of the battle. His decision set history in motion. The Germans, convinced they had surprised the Americans, pressed on with confidence. Yet within hours, their disciplined formations would encounter artillery unlike anything seen before. The gamble Hitler staked Germany's future upon was about to face its first reckoning. The opening days of the Ardennes offensive revealed both brilliance and blindness. Bold tactics and secrecy had achieved shock, but the German gamble carried risks that technology and one unauthorized act would soon expose with devastating clarity. Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson commanded the 406th Artillery Group near Monschau. On the morning of December 16th, he confronted an impossible situation. His guns were the only shield for the overrun 38th Cavalry Squadron facing annihilation. The German advance was relentless. Infantry columns pressed forward in tight formations, their officers shouting commands above the chaos. Tanks crawled through the snow, their cannons ready to shatter any resistance. Conventional artillery fire barely slowed their momentum. Axelson knew his orders. Proximity fuses were top secret, restricted to anti-aircraft use only. If captured, they could reveal Allied technological superiority. Unauthorized deployment carried severe consequences, including possible court-martial. Yet hesitation meant certain defeat. In that frozen moment, Axelson weighed duty against survival. He saw terrified American scouts clinging to their positions, hopeless against overwhelming German numbers. To follow orders meant sacrificing them. To disobey meant risking his career, and perhaps the war itself. He chose defiance. With calm authority, Axelson instructed his gunners to load the experimental shells. Men exchanged uncertain glances. Few understood what these weapons truly did, only that they were guarded like crown jewels. The order felt almost surreal. Soldiers accustomed to strict hierarchy watched their commander knowingly break rules. Some expected a reprimand later, others sensed history in motion. Either way, they followed. The first proximity-fused rounds slid into artillery barrels. The guns roared, but something strange followed. Instead of cratering into frozen ground, the shells burst mid-air, precisely above the advancing Germans. A deadly rain of steel fragments cascaded downward, covering far wider areas than expected. German veterans instinctively sought cover in foxholes, behind trees, inside ditches, yet nothing saved them. Fragments struck from above, bypassing every defense honed from years on the Eastern Front. Foxholes became coffins, trenches became death traps. Confusion spread rapidly. Soldiers looked skyward in disbelief as invisible mathematics determined their fate. Officers tried rallying formations, but panic rippled through the ranks. The old rules of survival no longer applied. The battlefield had changed overnight. American observers were equally stunned. They watched entire enemy platoons vanish under successive barrages, formations shredded before reaching friendly lines. Conventional artillery support had never been so decisive. In mere minutes, Axelson's gamble proved devastatingly effective. Word spread quickly among U.S. units. Something extraordinary had happened at Monschau. Soldiers whispered about magic shells that seemed to hunt the enemy. None knew the science, but all recognized salvation delivered from above. Axelson, meanwhile, braced for consequences. He understood that higher command would soon learn of his disobedience. The secret was out. Yet in his mind, the choice was justified. He had saved lives when orders offered only defeat. News reached Allied headquarters within hours. Reports described German assaults halted in mid-stride, casualties piling far beyond expectations. Eisenhower's staff faced a dilemma: punish Axelson for defying restrictions or embrace the weapon that had altered the battle's course. The situation across the Ardennes was deteriorating rapidly. German breakthroughs threatened to split Allied lines, Bastogne was under siege, and American morale hung by a thread. Commanders needed every advantage possible. Axelson's gamble could not be ignored. By December 19th, General Eisenhower formally requested authorization for general use of proximity fuses in ground combat. On December 21st, restrictions were lifted. Axelson's unauthorized decision had forced the Army's hand and reshaped the battlefield. For German troops, the nightmare was only beginning. They would face air bursts that struck without warning, weapons seemingly endowed with intelligence. For Americans, Axelson's defiance became a turning point, proof that ingenuity and risk could hold back the tide. The desperate decision at Monschau symbolized more than disobedience. It revealed the razor's edge of war, where survival demanded boldness, and where one man's gamble with forbidden weapons could tilt the balance of history itself. The proximity fuse was unlike anything soldiers in 1944 had ever seen. To the Germans, it seemed as though artillery shells possessed minds of their own, choosing the perfect moment to explode with terrifying precision. In truth, the secret lay in miniature radar. Each fuse contained a tiny transmitter and receiver that emitted radio waves. When those waves bounced off objects below, the returning signal triggered detonation at optimal height above the target. This innovation multiplied artillery's lethality. Instead of burying energy in the ground, explosions now hovered in midair, scattering fragments outward in deadly cones. A single shell could devastate whole squads, nullifying entrenched positions or wooded cover. The science behind it seemed almost impossible for its time. Each fuse held around 130 delicate components, including miniature vacuum tubes. These tiny marvels had to survive the brutal launch forces of artillery, accelerations 20,000 times Earth's gravity. To achieve this, American engineers reinvented electronics. Vacuum tubes, once fragile in home radios, were shrunk to the size of pencil erasers, reinforced with special designs that endured staggering heat, rotation, and sudden shock. It was engineering wizardry in metal. The project's secrecy rivaled that of the Manhattan Project. At its height, nearly 3% of all American physicists worked on proximity fuses. Many lab facilities disguised themselves as mundane businesses to conceal their true purpose. One such hub was Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, operating behind the facade of a used car dealership in Maryland. Scientists like Dr. Merle Tuve pushed boundaries relentlessly, demanding solutions once considered fantastical, even absurd. Production was equally monumental. Over 100 companies shifted from civilian goods to fuse components. Crosley abandoned refrigerators, RCA halted radios, and General Electric redirected resources. By late 1944, factories produced 40,000 fuses every single day. Security was suffocating. Workers could not discuss their tasks, even with spouses. Each fuse carried a unique serial number for tracking. The War Department feared even a single captured unit could expose the Allies' technological advantage. Had German development continued, they might have wielded these weapons years earlier, perhaps against Britain in 1940 or Russia in 1941. Instead, their scientists scoffed when captured American fuses were examined, dismissing them as impossible to function. But the impossible was working brilliantly. American gunners discovered they no longer required perfect accuracy. Shells would automatically detonate at lethal altitude. Even poor adjustments still delivered devastating results, turning artillery into the most decisive weapon on the battlefield. This transformed tactics. Instead of carefully bracketing targets with multiple salvos, observers could call rapid fire with confidence. Forest cover, darkness, and bad weather no longer protected advancing troops. Artillery had evolved into a weapon that ignored camouflage entirely. The psychological impact was immense. German soldiers reported feeling hunted by invisible eyes. Shells burst with uncanny timing overhead, making men question whether the Americans possessed supernatural powers. Terror eroded discipline long before bullets reached their lines. Back home, ordinary workers unknowingly shaped this revolution. Women assembling tiny tubes or soldering circuits in long shifts never realized they were building devices that decided battles. They labored in secrecy, creating death packaged with scientific precision. The cost was staggering, over $1 billion wartime dollars, second only to the atomic bomb project. Yet by the winter of 1944, the investment had paid off. The proximity fuse was ready to change history's largest land battle. What began as hidden blueprints and fragile prototypes was now unleashed on Europe's frozen battlefields. Technology once thought unimaginable had crossed from laboratory to front line, rewriting the very rules of combat in the Ardennes. The secret was no longer confined to locked vaults. With every shell fired, every German column shattered, the proximity fuse announced itself. Warfare had entered a new age, one where science, not just manpower, determined survival. Bastogne, a small Belgian town ringed by forests and crossroads, became the linchpin of the Ardennes offensive. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled the arteries of supply and movement. For the Germans, seizing it was essential. For the Americans, holding it meant survival. The 101st Airborne Division, rushed by truck through icy roads, arrived just in time. Undersupplied and exhausted, they dug in against encirclement. By December 19th, the town was cut off, surrounded by powerful German forces pressing from every side. The siege tested human endurance. Food dwindled, ammunition ran low, and the wounded-filled basements turned into makeshift hospitals. Snowstorms grounded Allied aircraft, leaving defenders isolated. The situation grew increasingly desperate with each passing day. Yet Bastogne possessed a secret weapon, the proximity fuse. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, armed with 75mm pack howitzers, received limited supplies of the revolutionary shells. Though scarce, they became force multipliers that amplified the defenders' dwindling firepower. On December 22nd, German commanders sent an ultimatum demanding surrender. General Anthony McAuliffe's now legendary reply was a single word: nuts. That defiance set the tone. Bastogne would not fall easily, not while artillery thundered from within its perimeter. German assaults soon followed. Waves of infantry advanced across snowy fields in traditional formations. Proximity-fused shells burst overhead, shredding attackers with merciless precision. Platoons evaporated within seconds, leaving twisted forms sprawled across white landscapes that became stained crimson. Veterans who once trusted wooded cover or foxholes now realized nowhere was safe. Airbursts scythed through branches, turning them into wooden shrapnel. Snowflakes mingled with splinters and steel fragments, raining down on panicked soldiers. Psychological shock spread faster than the explosions themselves. Survivors described shells that seemed to see their movements. Rumors of American death technology circulated in German trenches, eroding morale long before direct combat occurred. The 969th Field Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit equipped with 155mm howitzers, also played a decisive role. Their heavier shells detonated at higher altitudes, blanketing vast areas with lethal fragments. Bastogne's perimeter became a killing ground no attacker could cross. Despite hunger and cold, American gunners maintained relentless tempo. Between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd fired over 7,600 rounds. Every proximity-fused shell delivered disproportionate results, compensating for shortages and keeping enemy breakthroughs at bay. For German soldiers, advancing became a nightmare of sound and light. Bursts illuminated the snowy night skies, followed by screams and silence. No tactic, spread formations, camouflage, or cover offered escape. Bastogne devoured entire battalions in minutes. Inside the town, defenders drew hope from the weapon's impact. Every successful repulse, every shattered German column, proved that Bastogne could endure. Though supplies dwindled, morale hardened. The men believed reinforcements would arrive before their strength collapsed. General Patton's Third Army was racing north to relieve them. His artillery commanders, already exploiting proximity fuses, perfected techniques like time-on-target barrages, where dozens of shells detonated simultaneously above enemy lines, unleashing apocalyptic firestorms. As days dragged on, weather remained both enemy and ally. Snow prevented resupply by air, but it also shielded American positions from detection. In those moments, proximity fuses proved invaluable, striking blindly yet accurately in whiteout conditions. German commanders grew increasingly frustrated. Reports described catastrophic losses, formations disintegrating before reaching American lines. Even elite units faltered, refusing orders to assault through killing zones. Bastogne had become an impregnable fortress, not through walls, but through science. On December 26th, Patton's spearhead broke through, reaching the encircled town. Cheers erupted, relief supplies arrived, and the siege effectively ended. Bastogne had held. Its defense marked not just courage, but technological dominance on the battlefield. The crucible of Bastogne demonstrated the proximity fuse's true value. Against overwhelming odds, science gave outnumbered defenders the edge they needed. In snow and fire, Bastogne became the proving ground of a weapon that reshaped modern war. General George S. Patton understood artillery like few commanders alive. To him, guns weren't simply supporting weapons, they were instruments of dominance. In the Ardennes, armed with proximity fuses, Patton intended to unleash something truly apocalyptic. Patton's Third Army had been rushing north through icy roads to relieve Bastogne. His columns slogged through snowdrifts and traffic jams, while German counterattacks threatened flanks. Yet artillery battalions kept pace, ready to pave the way with fire. The proximity fuse became Patton's hammer. He and his artillery commander, Brigadier General Edward Williams, developed new methods to exploit its destructive potential. They emphasized time-on-target concentrations, coordinated barrages where dozens of shells struck simultaneously. Imagine a snowy field suddenly erupting into mid-air explosions, all at once, fragments raining from multiple angles. German troops described these moments as living inside a storm of steel, with no hope of cover or escape. Between December 22nd and 29th, Patton's army fired an estimated 50,000 proximity-fused shells. Each barrage carried mathematical certainty. Veterans called it death from above. Germans nicknamed the phenomenon the bell toll of death. The effect was not just physical, but deeply psychological. Soldiers who once endured artillery with grim resignation now broke under air bursts. Some squads dissolved before orders reached them, terror shattering cohesion long before bullets arrived. At Elsenborn Ridge, American artillery fired 160,000 rounds over 3 days, 40,000 with proximity fuses. Those 25% of shells accounted for 60% of German casualties. The math left no doubt. Science was slaughter. Patton's gunners refined techniques with ruthless efficiency. Observers noted that precision mattered less now. Even approximate fire proved lethal, as fuses detonated at perfect height automatically. Efficiency soared. Ammunition expenditure dropped while effectiveness multiplied tenfold. The battlefield transformed into a symphony of timed explosions. Commanders coordinated multiple battalions, ensuring shells arrived in synchronized waves. German infantry caught in open fields faced annihilation unlike anything experienced on either front of the war. Patton marveled at results. In his memoirs, he later wrote, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us." That wasn't bluster. The weapon had turned desperate defense into decisive offense. German officers, interrogated later, admitted helplessness. No countermeasure existed. Camouflage, dispersal, or entrenchment, all rendered obsolete. Airbursts struck with uncanny reliability. Many concluded America had achieved technological dominance beyond their reach, ushering in a new era of warfare. Behind these barrages stood exhausted gunners, shivering in icy pits, feeding shells into barrels with frozen fingers. They worked tirelessly, knowing every round might be the one that broke a German assault before it reached friendly lines. The sheer scale stunned observers. American artillery dominated the Ardennes battlefield like an invisible wall, reshaping combat tempo. Infantry held ground, tanks maneuvered, but it was artillery, Patton's hammer, that dictated survival for friend and foe alike. By early January, German momentum collapsed. Supply lines stretched, fuel ran dry, and every attempted advance met curtains of steel fragments. Patton's artillery shattered the illusion of German invincibility, proving numbers meant little against overwhelming firepower. The hammer blow of proximity-fused barrages did more than defend Bastogne or Elsenborn. It reversed initiative. American forces, once fighting for survival, now pressed forward with confidence, driving German armies back through the snow-choked forests they once dominated. Patton's hammer symbolized the fusion of leadership, logistics, and science. Bold tactics, relentless artillery, and cutting-edge technology combined into a weapon of destiny. The Battle of the Bulge would not be remembered as Germany's triumph, but as America's stand. For centuries, soldiers relied on forests for cover. Dense trees shielded movement, muffled sound, and absorbed artillery impacts. In the Ardennes, German troops entered the woods believing nature itself would protect them from American firepower. They were wrong. With proximity fuses, the very thing that offered concealment became a trap. Artillery shells detonating above treetops shattered branches into deadly splinters, mixing wood with steel in storms of lethal fragments. The effect was horrifying. Men who once crouched confidently behind thick trunks discovered those same trunks exploded into projectiles. A single blast multiplied into thousands of jagged shards, filling the air with whistling death. Foxholes and dugouts, traditional refugees beneath root systems, lost their value. Fragments fell from above, cascading into trenches like rain. What had once been safe positions became slaughter pits, leaving survivors dazed and broken. American gunners recognized this multiplier effect quickly. Forward observers deliberately targeted wooded areas, knowing one proximity-fused shell could clear patches of forest the size of tennis courts, annihilating hidden squads without requiring pinpoint accuracy. German tactical doctrine, once considered advanced, unraveled. Should soldiers bunch for support, risking entire squads to a single shell? Or spread thinly, making them easy prey for infantry counterattacks? Every option carried fatal consequences. Reports described German companies disintegrating in minutes. Bursts echoed across valleys, each explosion stripping trees bare and leaving scorched snow littered with shattered bodies. Survivors stumbled aimlessly, their sense of strategy destroyed by invisible mathematics overhead. The psychological impact rivaled the physical destruction. Soldiers whispered that Americans controlled weather, turning forests against them. Others swore the shells contained demons, since no human weapon could inflict such omnipresent devastation from above. For Americans, the change felt almost miraculous. Infantry advancing cautiously into woods suddenly found opposition melted away. Where once ambushes lurked, only silence remained. punctuated by smoldering trunks and eerie stillness after apocalyptic barrages. The Ardennes, once trusted as Germany's ally, betrayed them. Forests they knew intimately became places of dread. Patrols refused to enter heavily shelled groves, convinced death lingered invisibly among shattered branches. Artillerymen, too, sensed the weapon's transformation of nature. Some described watching entire tree lines collapse under repeated barrages, leaving open fields where dense cover had stood only hours earlier. The woods themselves seemed to burn and bleed. Survivors later spoke of nightmares. The sound of branches snapping under shell fire haunted them long after the war. Unlike traditional wounds, wooden splinters inflicted injuries more gruesome, tearing flesh in unpredictable, horrifying patterns. By Christmas, forest battles no longer resembled infantry skirmishes. They became exterminations from above. The Germans had counted on terrain to mask their advances, but every wooded ridge turned into a killing ground lit by airbursts. German commanders struggled for answers. Camouflage lost meaning. Ambushes evaporated before they began. Units ordered to hold forests dissolved under firestorms, leaving gaps in lines that Allied infantry exploited. Nature's fortress had become a trapdoor to death. The Americans pressed this advantage ruthlessly. Shell after shell fell on German columns weaving through woods. Winter snow reflected explosions, illuminating forests in ghostly flashes. Entire battalions perished beneath canopies that once promised shelter. The Ardennes campaign proved that proximity fuses did more than kill. They rewrote geography. Forests no longer belonged to those who occupied them. Instead, they became landscapes weaponized by science, stripped of their tactical purpose forever. By the time the German offensive faltered, soldiers no longer trusted the woods that once offered safety. The Ardennes, transformed into firestorms of steel and splinters, testified to the terrifying union of technology and terrain. German intelligence officers initially dismissed reports of strange American shells. Soldiers spoke of explosions occurring in mid-air, but to analysts, such claims sounded like battlefield exaggerations. Surely, no artillery could sense targets and detonate automatically. Evidence quickly mounted. Prisoner interrogations and captured fragments confirmed something extraordinary. Yet technical experts scoffed. They believed such devices impossible to manufacture, especially under battlefield conditions. They misread the evidence, clinging to outdated assumptions about electronics. That single decision proved catastrophic. The Americans solved the engineering puzzle Germany abandoned. Where German engineers believed vacuum tubes too fragile, U.S. scientists miniaturized and strengthened them. By 1944, America mass-produced what Germany once deemed unachievable. When German forces captured 20,000 fuses in late December, disbelief deepened. Engineers opened them, studied their parts, and declared them unworkable. They assumed Americans used trickery, decoys hiding some other mechanism, because the real explanation defied their expectations. Some insisted the devices used magnetism. Others theorized pressure-sensitive timers. None accepted that radio waves and miniaturized tubes operated inside shells enduring 20,000 Gs. Skepticism blinded them from recognizing the weapon destroying their armies daily. Field commanders paid the price. They faced artillery that shattered formations and obliterated morale, while technical experts back home denied its possibility. The disconnect between frontline suffering and laboratory disbelief was painfully tragic. Captured German soldiers often expressed awe. They described shells that burst overhead like intelligent predators, stripping away the usefulness of trenches or forests. For them, the weapon's reality was undeniable, etched into trauma and loss. Still, High Command dismissed testimonies as fear-driven exaggerations. This refusal delayed countermeasure development. By the time they realized truth, Allied artillery had already fired hundreds of thousands of proximity-fused shells, crippling German offensives across the Ardennes. Historians later noted bitter irony. German engineers, so close in 1940, could have fielded proximity fuses years earlier. Had they done so, Britain's survival in 1940 or Russia's defenses in 1941 might have faltered. Hermann Göring, interrogated after the war, admitted German fuses were only months from production when canceled. That miscalculation echoed through history, highlighting how short-sighted decisions undermined Germany's technological edge at critical moments. As casualties mounted in the Ardennes, frontline commanders begged for explanations. Why could no cover withstand American fire? Why did forests, once shields, become graveyards? Answers never came. Confusion eroded trust between soldiers and their leaders. Morale collapsed further when rumors spread of supernatural weapons. Stories described radio-guided death or shells with eyes. In truth, soldiers needed rational explanations, but their commanders offered none. Fear filled the void left by denial. By January, German reports finally acknowledged the truth. They admitted Americans possessed a radio-controlled fuse detonating shells at optimal height. Yet the confession came too late. The weapon's decisive impact had already crippled the offensive. Proximity fuses symbolized Germany's broader wartime decline. Brilliant scientists existed, but authoritarian leadership strangled innovation. Where America fostered collaboration and long-term investment, Germany demanded quick victories. The result was paralysis, even as evidence of enemy superiority mounted. The confusion endured beyond the battlefield. Post-war interrogations revealed shock among German engineers, many still refusing to believe Americans mass-produced such devices. Their disbelief stood as a testament to hubris and a reminder of innovation's strategic power. The Ardennes campaign showed that disbelief can be deadlier than defeat. German confusion, rooted in arrogance and short-sightedness, ensured they were outmatched not only by enemy firepower, but by the very imagination they dismissed. By late December, the Ardennes had become a graveyard of ambition. German formations that once surged confidently into Belgium now hesitated at every step, haunted by airbursts that shattered discipline and reduced seasoned troops to frightened shadows. Proximity fuses were merciless equalizers. Elite units like Otto Skorzeny commandos, once celebrated for daring exploits, found themselves helpless beneath overhead barrages. Their training and disguises meant nothing when steel fragments rained indiscriminately from above. Survivors described the psychological collapse vividly. Some soldiers, unable to bear the terror, abandoned cover entirely, charging toward American lines in reckless desperation. They preferred capture or instant death to the unbearable suspense of waiting under fire. Morale, once rooted in confidence and camaraderie, dissolved into mayhem. Squads broke apart, platoons vanished, and entire companies scattered without orders. German officers shouted commands into the chaos, only to see men refuse or vanish into woods. American observers recognized the shift. Prisoners often appeared dazed, trembling, unable to articulate what had happened. Many repeated phrases like, "The sky kills us," revealing trauma that extended beyond wounds to the psyche itself. For artillerymen, the effect was both gratifying and unsettling. They watched through binoculars as advancing columns dissolved, yet they also realized the human cost of their work. War was always cruel, but this felt uniquely merciless. Meanwhile, on the American side, morale surged. Soldiers trapped at Bastogne or fighting at Elsenborn Ridge drew confidence from the weapon's devastating reliability. They believed science itself fought beside them, tipping odds in their favor. The industrial miracle behind the fuses added to this morale. News spread that American factories produced 40,000 units daily. Soldiers marveled at home-front workers who unknowingly built devices that saved them in frozen foxholes. Factories, often staffed by women working 12-hour shifts, operated with relentless precision. Every solder joint was inspected, every component tested. Workers didn't know what they were building, but their discipline powered battlefield victories across Europe. Yet secrecy weighed heavily. Accidents and exhaustion took their toll, with some workers suffering breakdowns. Families remained ignorant of their sacrifices, while the pressure of perfection gnawed silently. Their unseen struggle mirrored the soldiers' visible torment. By Christmas Day, German units attempted resupply under the assumption of temporary calm. American artillery, armed with proximity fuses, showed no mercy. Field kitchens and convoys disintegrated under night bombardments. Even food and rest became illusions. The psychological toll deepened. German soldiers no longer trusted routine. Night marches, once safe from observation, became death sentences. Poor weather offered no sanctuary. Death came any time, without warning, accompanied only by the shriek of incoming shells. Chaos spread to strategy. Commanders hesitated to order massed assaults, knowing proximity fuses thrived against concentrations. Dispersed attacks diluted strength. Bunched formations courted annihilation. Every tactical decision became a choice between futility and suicide. In this atmosphere, discipline unraveled. German units, once renowned for cohesion, melted into fragments. Soldiers deserted, ignored orders, or surrendered prematurely. Panic replaced precision, leaving high command powerless against an invisible storm of American firepower. The mayhem extended beyond the battlefield. Civilians caught in contested towns witnessed German troops retreating in disarray, abandoning equipment and wounded. For local populations, it marked a turning point, proof that the once feared Wehrmacht had lost its grip. Proximity fuses had achieved something rare in warfare. They didn't just inflict casualties, they broke the human spirit. Fear spread faster than shrapnel, ensuring that morale collapsed long before final defeat arrived. The Battle of the Bulge thus revealed warfare's new dimension. It wasn't merely tanks and guns deciding outcomes, but psychology weaponized through technology. At the breaking point, mayhem reigned, and morale became the most fragile commodity of all. When the guns finally fell silent in the Ardennes, the proximity fuse had already proven itself more than a battlefield innovation. It was a glimpse of the future, warfare transformed by science, precision, and automation. The weapon's immediate impact was undeniable. German commanders openly admitted its decisive role. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt conceded that American artillery, empowered by the fuse, seemed to have eyes. Technology, not sheer numbers, tipped the balance. General Hasso von Manteuffel echoed similar thoughts. He noted that even veteran German troops, once unshakable under bombardment, panicked at the sound of incoming shells. The airburst phenomenon made artillery not just destructive, but terrifyingly inescapable. For Eisenhower, the lesson was clear. He later remarked that if Germany had possessed such technology during Normandy, D-Day itself might have failed. The proximity fuse wasn't a minor edge. It was potentially war-changing in scope. Beyond the Ardennes, its legacy extended into strategic calculations. Anti-aircraft gunners armed with proximity fuses achieved kill rates against V-1 flying bombs that leapt from 17% to nearly 80%. The skies themselves became safer for allies. The fuse demonstrated the marriage of mass production and high science. It wasn't enough to invent breakthrough technology. It had to be built in millions, tested ruthlessly, and distributed across continents. America's industrial base proved uniquely capable. Factories refined unprecedented quality control systems. Every component was inspected under magnification, every batch fired for testing. These standards later became industry norms, shaping post-war electronics, aerospace, and even consumer goods manufacturing for generations. The miniaturization techniques pioneered for vacuum tubes seeded an entirely new industry. Dr. James Van Allen, who helped design them, later applied his expertise to satellites, discovering Earth's radiation belts and influencing the space race. Workers on assembly lines, many unaware of their contribution, laid foundations for modern supply chains. Coordinating over 100 companies for a single product demanded organizational brilliance that inspired future models of globalized production. Strategically, the fuse altered how armies thought about artillery. No longer a blunt instrument, it became a precision tool that could deny terrain, shatter morale, and dominate battlefields without requiring direct observation or daylight. This philosophy carried forward into the Cold War. Guided missiles, smart bombs, and eventually drones all drew lineage from the proximity fuse, the first munition to sense its environment and decide detonation for maximum effect. Military planners began asking new questions. If a fuse could think, however simply, what else could be automated? The concept of intelligent weapons was born, reshaping doctrines and ushering in the age of technological warfare. The legacy also contained moral complexity. Proximity fuses killed with ruthless efficiency, often against soldiers with no defense. Some veterans struggled with this memory, wrestling with the line between necessity and horror. Efficiency came at human cost. Yet the broader calculus favored its use. The Battle of the Bulge alone cost 19,000 American lives. Without proximity fuses, that number might have doubled, prolonging the war and delaying liberation of occupied Europe. Every day shortened by technological advantage saved thousands from camps, starvation, and bombardment. For many historians, this context reframes the weapon, not as cruelty amplified, but as tragedy reduced in a conflict already steeped in unimaginable loss. The proximity fuse's descendants remain everywhere today. Precision-guided munitions, anti-missile systems, and even consumer electronics trace ancestry to that winter of 1944, when tiny tubes inside shells rewrote the mathematics of death and survival. Its true legacy lies not only in battles won, but in the lesson it carried. Wars are no longer determined only by courage or numbers, but by the societies capable of wielding innovation at scale. In the forests of the Ardennes, the proximity fuse proved that science itself had become a weapon. Its legacy endures, reminding us that the future of war will always be written not just in blood, but in invention. By January 25, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. German armies reeled in retreat, their dream of splitting the Allies shattered. The Ardennes, once Hitler's last gamble, became his empire's graveyard. The cost was staggering. American forces suffered 75,000 casualties, including 19,000 killed. German losses climbed to nearly 100,000. Among those numbers lay shattered towns, burned villages, and families caught in the storm of desperation. Yet within that tragedy emerged a truth. The proximity fuse had tilted the balance. Allied commanders agreed it shortened the battle, saved tens of thousands of lives, and prevented German breakthroughs that could have changed history. General Eisenhower reflected grimly. He believed that if Germany had possessed such technology earlier, Normandy might have failed. Victory at the Bulge wasn't guaranteed by bravery alone. It was secured through innovation's quiet hand. German officers echoed this. Von Rundstedt admitted artillery became decisive because it had eyes. Manteuffel spoke of panic among veterans, shaken by shells that burst above instead of around them. Technology had undone discipline, hardened by years of war. The numbers told their own story. 200,000 proximity-fused shells were fired during the Ardennes campaign, responsible for perhaps 20% of German casualties. A weapon once restricted for secrecy had become a decisive battlefield tool. For the Germans who endured it, memories lingered like scars. Survivors recalled forests exploding around them, foxholes filling with fragments, and skies raining steel. Death had come from above with precision they couldn't comprehend. For American gunners, it felt like wielding science itself. They loaded shells that changed outcomes, weapons whispering of a new kind of war. Pride mingled with unease, as victory came through devastating efficiency. Behind the battlefield, unseen sacrifices mattered too. Factory workers in Cincinnati, Philadelphia, and Baltimore churned out fuses around the clock. Women hunched over soldering irons unknowingly built devices that determined whether Bastogne lived or died. The secrecy surrounding their work left many in silence for decades. Only later did they learn the truth, that their shifts in smoke-filled plants had shortened the war and saved countless soldiers abroad. The reckoning was also moral. Proximity fuses killed with terrifying impartiality. They stripped soldiers of defenses honed over centuries. Some historians argue it blurred the line between combat and execution. But in war, efficiency often outweighs sentiment. Would the war have ended differently without them? Almost certainly. The Bulge might have dragged on for weeks, draining Allied strength, delaying the push into Germany, and prolonging suffering across occupied Europe. Innovation accelerated liberation. The fuse's ultimate legacy extended far beyond 1945. Its principles seeded guided missiles, smart munitions, and space exploration. It was the first true smart weapon, proving machines could sense, calculate, and act with autonomy. Technology's shadow loomed larger after the Bulge. Commanders realized wars would be won not by numbers alone, but by scientific leaps. The arms race of the future had already begun, born in Ardennes snow. For the soldiers who endured it, the reckoning was deeply personal. German veterans carried memories of terror. American veterans remembered relief. Both sides recognized they had witnessed warfare crossing into a new technological age. The Battle of the Bulge ended Hitler's illusions of victory. His gamble collapsed, his armies bled dry, his empire crumbling. In the frozen forests, history pivoted, and the proximity fuse was one of its sharpest levers. In the end, it wasn't just courage, strategy, or numbers that decided the Ardennes. It was invention. Tiny circuits inside shells rewrote the mathematics of survival, ensuring the Allies carried the war into Germany's heartland. The final reckoning is this. The proximity fuse proved that wars belong to the societies able to harness science at scale. In 1944, America showed it, and the world of warfare would never be the same again.